and welcome to another video review. This is Crysis Warhead for PC. Now, if you're confused by the title of this video, it's because Crysis Wars is actually considered its own game despite being just the multiplayer component of Crysis Warhead. When you get Crysis Warhead, what you end up getting is a standalone Crysis Warhead, which is just the single-player portion of the game, and then you get standalone Crysis Wars, which is just the multiplayer portion of the game. I really don't know why they decided to split them up like they did. I mean, the original Crysis had just the single and multiplayer components in the same game, and I guess they felt the need that making Crysis Wars was it was different enough from the actual game that they decided it was deserved to be its own standalone thing. I really don't know, but basically they're the same thing as Crysis, only they're split apart. So don't be confused by the title. Now, like its predecessor, this runs on CryEngine 2, and this time it's been updated. So you got some things that look better. They've changed some textures around, like the weapons now have different finishes, different camos. Like the Scar now has like a digital jungle-ish forest camo kind of thing going on, and the FY71 has different framing colors and everything. So they have changed up the textures a little bit. They've also made the very high settings available for DirectX 9, which you couldn't do in the original game. That was all limited to DirectX 10 unless you hacked into the game and fiddled with some things. And so what they did was they made the very high settings available to DirectX 9, but if you don't have DirectX 10 enabled, then it simply just doesn't use those features. So what ends up happening is, instead of doing the DirectX 10 thing in Crysis 1, when you didn't actually have DirectX 10, and it running horribly, it actually runs pretty well in Warhead. Not only that, but it runs better than the original Crysis, because they actually optimized the engine this time around. So what ends up happening is, you have a game that looks better, and it runs better at the same time. So people tend to use the original game as the benchmark still, because it's still more punishing on the hardware. But Crysis Warhead does look better, and it does play much better too as a result of the engine optimizations. Now, the sound design is pretty much exactly the same as the original Crysis, only they've added in some new music, which is action-oriented rather than the more mood music that was in the original game. And they've also added in some new characters, so they've got new voice actors. But they're on par with the rest of the game and the original game too, so it really hasn't changed all that much. And then we come to the story and the gameplay. Now, the story is basically you play as Psycho, who was in Nomad's team in the original Crysis. And when he goes off and does his own thing in the original game, that's actually what you're playing in Warhead. Basic story is this Korean officer has absconded with this container that the intelligence says, hey, it might contain a nuclear warhead, so we need to recover that as soon as possible. And so they send in Psycho to actually recover this thing. And so when all hell breaks loose on the island and the aliens really come out, that happens in Warhead as well. So what ends up happening is you have the same exact problem between Crysis 1 and Crysis Warhead. They cannot transition from the fighting human enemies to fighting aliens. They just can't do it. I don't understand why they can't do it, but they can't. Because it just seems like when the aliens pop in, it's like, oh, hey, aliens. And it's just the same exact problem in the storytelling that it was in the original game. They just can't really make the transition work. I don't know why. And the same problem persists with the gameplay. It's fun up until the aliens pop in. Now, granted, they did balance things out a little bit more. Aliens do take less shots to bring down now. Enemies in general take less shots to bring down. I don't know whether they raised the damage of the weapons or lowered the health of the enemies, whatever it may be. But enemies do take a lot less rounds to bring down, and that is much, much appreciated. Because in Crysis 1, it felt like you were always running out of ammo because it just took so many bullets to bring something down. And in Warhead, you don't need as many bullets to take something down, so you never seem like you're running out of ammo as much. Plus, they throw a lot of ammo at you, especially for the weapons that you start with, which is the Scar, and of course, eventually you get the Gauss Rifle, and they give you plenty of ammo for both of them. So it's massively better in terms of the overall design as to what they were doing, because instead of having that tease at the beginning of the game where they give you the assault rifle that's pretty much one of the best weapons in the game, and you can barely use it, now you can actually use all this stuff, and it really does feel much better. It feels more action-oriented than it does just like being against you the entire time. That said, aliens are still ungodly overpowered, even with the amount of ammo you get, even with the damage increase or the health decrease, whatever it is, because they still have the same problems. They are still pinpoint accurate. They are still really hard to hit, and they still actually take a lot of bullets to bring down. Now, there are moments when you actually do get squad mates, and that does help out quite a lot, especially when the aliens pop in and you suddenly have to fight those. Because when that happens, you actually get some of the focus taken off of you and onto the aliens. From the aliens onto your squad mates, and they're not too bad with their weapons either, so they can actually hit things and take them down. Now, it takes more shots for them to bring down stuff than it does you, but still, it's a very helpful thing. But they've also added in new alien types, and one of these is an alien that shields others around it. So what ends up happening is, unless you can take that one out very quickly, because it tends to hide behind the aliens that it's shielding, unless you can take that out as quickly as possible, you're basically fighting invincible enemies. And it's extremely annoying to have to deal with that crap. Now, like I said, they do take less rounds to bring down, so that does help a little, but it's still, the difficulty spike between fighting humans and fighting aliens is still massive. So, you end up having the same problems between Crysis 1 and Crysis Warhead in terms of single player, where once the aliens pop in, it really just takes a massive downward spiral, and it just becomes completely irritating rather than fun. But other than that, it's really the same gameplay as Crysis. Now, then they go on to the multiplayer, which is Crysis Wars, and they've added in Team Deathmatch, basically. It's the Team Instant Action mode. And it does about what you'd expect. It's instant action only with teams. And from what I can tell, because it's really hard to find, in fact, I think it's impossible now to find an unmodded server. So I really don't know what the original damages for the games are, the game is and everything. But from what I can tell, they've balanced out the game much better unless the mods did it for them. Because in Crysis 1, you had massive balancing issues where, in, say, Power Struggle, you would go in and you maybe joined a game late, and the enemies would have much better gear than you would because you just come in late and you didn't have that many prestige points. That problem's still there. But in terms of the overall balancing issues between weapons and skills and such, it's much better in general, at least from what they did in the original Crysis, that they didn't screw up. Basically, the strength thing is now not necessarily a one-hit kill. It's usually 2 hits, so it balances out much more. And you have a harder time doing the sprint with strength combo than you do in the original game, because it does take less rounds to bring somebody down than it did before. And enemies seem to be a little better to hit, a little easier to hit. I think it's just different mechanics that they've thrown in there, but anyway. To give you an idea of the main problems with Crysis Wars is that it's still ungodly exploitable. And the gameplay really hasn't changed much since Crysis 1, apart from they balanced out the issues that really plagued the original game. They didn't fix the ones that plague Crysis Wars, though. Namely, the AY-69, which is the new machine pistol you get. You can dual-wield them. They have 40-round magazines. And so if you have 2, you have 80 rounds of spray and pray. They have a very, very high rate of fire. In fact, it's higher than the submachine gun. They also have an extremely high damage for what they are. You wouldn't think they would have a lot of damage, but they are. Well, they do have a lot of damage. And so what people end up doing, inevitably, is exploiting that. They will sprint up to you in the speed mode and then just hose you down with these machine pistols. And before you can even react, you're dead. So, yeah, that ends up still being just as irritating as Crysis 1. The difference is that the maps are much bigger in Crysis Wars, so you end up having not quite as many problems with people exploiting the machine pistols. Now granted, most of the maps that I play on are modded, because you can't find an unmodded server anymore. So, it ends up being that people have a harder time exploiting that. It seems like the modding community really embraced the fact that this game has horrible balancing issues, and so they've tried to work around that, but still, it's glaringly obvious. And so, overall, Crysis Warhead and Crysis Wars are not much of a step up from the original Crysis. In fact, they really aren't a step up. They're just kind of a step sideways. And while it does some things better than the original game, it really doesn't do anything to bring it above the original game. So, overall, I really didn't have any fun playing Crysis Warhead. It does run better in general than Crysis 1 does, but at the same time, it's buggier. It actually crashes a lot more than Crysis 1 does, and I don't know why. So, do I have fun playing Crysis or Crysis Warhead? No, I don't. But somebody might. This one isn't as much of a benchmark tool, though, because it's more optimized than the original Crysis, so you don't have as many performance issues and all that. So, overall, I really can't recommend this at all. I do give it a 2 out of 5, but thanks for watching.